webinars that we'll be bringing straight to your homes each Thursday for the next few weeks. As Kara said, I'm Neha Savant, and I am the Land Science Specialist for the Nature Conservancy in New Jersey. Today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the importance of connecting habitat for wildlife and for people in New Jersey, and I'll be taking on you a journey across time. We'll imagine our beloved New Jersey landscape from thousands of years ago to hundreds of years ago to today and to the future. We'll talk a little bit about how TNC and conservation partners are working to create a future with enough space for wildlife and for humans to roam across the landscape freely. And lastly, I'll introduce you to some of the solutions that we're using and how TNC is working to make this vision a reality. We'll have some time at the end for your questions, but first I want to start off with a question for you all. So if you could be any land animal that lives in New Jersey, what would you be? Please feel free to share your answer in chat. And you can also check out some of the other folks that are on the call, their answers to this question as well. I have some options of New Jersey wildlife here, but feel free to think about your own favorite animals in New Jersey. Now think carefully about yourself as that animal. Where would you live? Where would you sleep? What would you eat? How far would you walk in a day? How far would you walk in a year? I want you to keep your animal alter ego in mind throughout this presentation. And so as we travel through time and we talk about New Jersey's habitats, imagine how it would be for your animal to move around in these landscapes. So to start us off, New Jersey's natural surroundings as we know them came into existence around 21,000 years ago, when the last of the glaciers pulled away from the northern part of our state. The region was left with a wide diversity of habitats. And here we have the mountainous deciduous forests of the north, where bears, wolves, and mountain lions roamed free. We also have the wetlands and limestone ponds and bogs that are scattered around the state. And these are some of my personal favorite places, where turtles, frogs, salamanders, and unusual plants like lady slippers like to live. We also have the grasslands and meadows that are home to resident and migrating birds, butterflies, native grasses, and rare flowers like the yellow spring beauties that are in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And those actually only grow in New Jersey. And then there's the New Jersey pine barrens, full of fence lizards, pine snakes, and tree frogs. And among all of these landscapes, the Lenni Lenape played an important role in its conservation. The Lenape are a nation of Native American people that lived among the forests, rivers, and coasts of New Jersey, managing and caring for the land. They burned and maintained the grasslands, they hunted for food, they maintained wildlife populations, and just like us, they dealt with cold weather, fires, hurricanes, and floods, and more. And they stewarded the land of New Jersey for 14,000 years until the Europeans colonized North America. And it was then, a little over 400 years ago, when our landscape started changing in a big way. Even as people disagreed on who owned the land or who should reside on the land, wildlife had free rein to move across the state. Reports from early Dutch settlers speak of the boundless wildlife that was found across New Jersey at this time, an abundance of foxes, wolves, beavers, minks, otters, and other wildcats. So if we jump ahead to 200 years ago, leading up to and during the 1800s, apologies for the sirens, during the 1800s, mining, logging, and the fur trade became the main industries across New Jersey. And they were responsible for some of the biggest changes that we've seen in our landscape, the loss of forest cover. Hunting was also unregulated at this time, and this combination led to the elimination of large wildlife like wolves and mountain lions from New Jersey's borders. So think again about your own animal alter ego. No matter what it is, a bobcat, an otter, a turtle, or even a butterfly, you would have had a much more difficult time finding a safe home in this landscape. If we jump forward again, by the 1900s, the forest started growing back and recovering. Animals start to re-inhabit some of the habitat that was lost. But simultaneously, New Jersey also experiences huge population increase. This skyrocketing population, combined with industrialization and the trend towards suburban life, led more and more humans out into these still recovering landscapes. And by the 2000s, forest clearing and building concrete structures and asphalt roads across the lands became more commonplace as development increased. And all of that development gets us to the 2010s. In this map, the gray areas represent urban growth built by the 1980s, and the red that you see is new urban growth. You can imagine this is a much more difficult place for an animal to navigate to their dens and to find food. But for people to get around and visit their own families, get food, live our lives, we use cars, and cars need roads. Which brings us, finally, to a map of today. The roads of New Jersey. These highlighted in red are some of the busiest that carry about 10,000 vehicles per day on a normal workday. You likely know some of these very, very well. Though roads make it easier for us to move, it makes it much more difficult for critters like bees, bobcats, raccoons, and even turtles to move to where they need to go. So let's take bobcats as an example. Bobcats are an endangered species in New Jersey. They were eliminated in New Jersey in about the mid-1900s. And in 1970, a set of 24 bobcats from Maine were brought in to reintroduce them. Bobcats have regained a tenuous foothold in the northern regions, with an estimated population around 300 these days. And to hunt, reproduce, and survive, bobcats need about 7 miles of space to roam per day. And they actually have the largest home range out of any land mammal in New Jersey. State biologists have evidence that cars and their impacts on the bobcats are the main source of bobcat mortality, and it keeps them from moving around, even into southern New Jersey habitats. If we take a closer look, here's a map of New Jersey's major roads. It's similar to the one that I showed you in the last slide, along with radio tracking data of 12 bobcats. Each color cluster you see of dots represents an individual bobcat. And you can see here at the edges of these 3 arrows that bobcats are staying within the bounds of major roads. They're not crossing them. And if bobcats aren't moving across roads, they aren't meeting their mates, they're not getting access to the whole range of habitats available, which means that the genetic diversity of bobcats and their long-term survival in New Jersey is in danger. And so, knowing all of this history and context, how do we move forward? We know we can't go back to the pre-1600s landscape when the Lenape cared for these lands. There were only maybe 10,000 humans living in this area. Now we have over 8 million people living in New Jersey. So how do we strike the balance between what humans need and what wildlife need? And as we move into the future, what do we want our landscape to look like? So the Nature Conservancy and New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection and many other partners across New Jersey have been focusing on using this 3-step plan. 1, protecting land. 2, restoring habitat. And 3, ensuring safe passage across roads. And I'll go into each one of them so we can discuss them in some more detail. So New Jersey actually has a very strong track record of land protection across the state. And this is mainly due to the support of local governments, land trusts, and the public. Currently, about 1/3 of the state's land is either preserved by protection or regulation. But even so, there's still a ways to go to ensure that wildlife have enough habitat to roam freely now and far into the future. The Nature Conservancy has been and continues to be a leading force in conservation in New Jersey. And this map shows all of the places that our organization has helped protect in New Jersey. In the last 5 years, TNC has been focusing on one region that we call Bobcat Alley. It's a 32,000-acre corridor that serves as an important passageway for our endangered bobcats and many other wildlife species between the Appalachian Mountains and the New Jersey Highland mountain ranges. And it also links many thousands more acres to neighboring states. The Nature Conservancy and other land trust partners have been buying land here for decades, and now the Conservancy has a goal of protecting 3,500 acres by 2027. We're currently about 45% way there, so we still have lots of work to do. And in New Jersey, this is not easy or quick because we have a state where land parcels are modest in size, but premium in price. Land protection in this area not only provides habitat for animals, but it also gives people like you and I a place to experience nature closer to its original state hundreds of years ago. And for this time period, that's been really important to me personally. Another big part of protecting land is restoring and managing it. TNC has been restoring lands and rivers in New Jersey since 1956. And this means planting trees, removing dams, and managing for invasive species, all of which require careful planning and execution, but also a big labor force. On the right here, you can see some of our volunteers that are planting trees in Bobcat Alley. And on the left, you can see some evidence of tree planting along the Pollenskill, which is a river that we've been working to restore the last few years. So with habitat protected and restored, we still run the risk of roads bisecting that habitat. And so the last thing we need to make sure of is that we offer options for the safe passage of wildlife across roads. Now, wildlife passage can take on different forms. Here's one that many of you have probably seen. It's an overpass across Route 78, built in 1986. This major project connects habitat bisected by the highway near the Watchung Reservation. Another more recent example is the Assunpink Turtle Tunnel, built just a couple of years ago. And this is what it looks like underneath. You can see that this crossing looks very different from the Route 78 overpass, which was built for larger animals like deer, bear, and bobcats. Crossings look different for many of the species we're trying to help. This one was made for turtles. You can see it's much smaller than the other one, and it has an open grate so that turtles can see sunlight and moonlight through the tunnel. It's only been a few years, but partners have already been seeing success on the ground through these cameras. Here is a painted turtle making its way through the tunnel. Here's a box turtle, a big old snapping turtle, and even a snake. Hopefully we can get the scribbles out soon. And a wildlife crossing may be built for one species, like this was built for turtles, but we know that many others will benefit from it too. So to make road crossings like this a success, there are a large number of partners that need to work together. Since 2015, TNC has been part of Connecting Habitat Across New Jersey, or CHANGE, which is a large statewide collaborative run that brings together partners in different sectors. So that's county governments, municipalities, universities, land trusts, and more. And we come together to work towards a shared goal of connecting habitat. At TNC, we've been working in Bobcat Alley specifically to collect some of the field data and information that's needed so partners can determine where to put some of these crossings. Over the past 2 years, we've been monitoring wildlife roadkill in Bobcat Alley to see where the hotspots are. In this map, you can see some of the areas that we're monitoring that are in Bobcat Alley. Along these same roads, we've been using wildlife camera traps to understand how wildlife are using or not using some of the existing infrastructure like culverts and bridges. Here is a series of pictures that I've captured in Bobcat Alley of a bobcat near a box culvert. And in these series, it's actually a little difficult to see if the bobcat actually used the culvert, since it looks like it might be walking straight across. But here's another series of pictures at that same culvert. Again, it's a little bit difficult to see if this bobcat used this culvert, but we know that it actually came through because we can see the kitten following behind the mother. You can actually see that this bobcat doesn't like the water that much either. So taking the roadkill data and the camera trap data, we're using it to develop recommendations and guidelines for transportation planners. And these reports that look something like this are to help incorporate wildlife perspective in their planning and see where it's necessary and possible to incorporate a crossing, or maybe incorporate some adjustments that make it more attractive for wildlife to use. And so, putting all of these three things together, protecting land, restoring habitat, and ensuring safe passage across roads, we can imagine a landscape that blends together the needs of both humans and wildlife. As the climate changes, wildlife will be moving to more suitable habitats, and it'll become even more important to ensure wildlife have corridors they need to move and the habitat they need to thrive. New Jersey was resilient across generations when the Lenape cared for these lands. Looking to our future, I think we know that the more resilient that our lands can be in the face of change, the more that New Jersey can continue to thrive for generations to come, and for you and your animal alter ego. So thank you all for joining and listening. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them now. Kara, are there any questions in the chat?
I do not see any questions in the chat just yet.
Okay.
Oh, yes, someone wants to know if you could pop up the Bobcat map again, so they can take a look
Sure.
at that.
Give me 1 second. There you go. Yeah, this is a really cool map that I always come back to just to see what the home range size of bobcats are, and it's really striking how roads really do impact the borders of those ranges.
Okay, where does funding come from?
So for these projects, with the road crossing and the camera trap surveys, we've partnered with the state biologists. And so there's a little bit of funding coming from the state, but a lot of our funding also comes from donors. So foundations, but also public donors. So we have a wide diversity of funding for this work. And land protection specifically comes from a lot from our donors as well.
Okay, I've got another one. What can we do to help animals crossing roads?
So an easy thing to do is to follow speed limits. Speed limits are written down for specific reasons, and sometimes they do include some of the possible wildlife that might be crossing. Another easy thing to do, because amphibians do have really specified times when they cross roads, is to slow down on rainy, dark nights. Oftentimes you'll get big amphibian migrations during that time. And then if you see any animals that are trying to cross roads, sometimes slowing down and even stopping before them and honking helps them move across, especially for mammals. But staying in proper speed limits on roads is, I think, the easiest way.
And then someone wants to know do you know how many bobcats are killed each year?
So I believe the last time that they recorded the amount of bobcats killed was a couple years ago. I mean, they're continually following this, but I think it was about 15 in a year that they saw reported. And again, most of those are happening in the northern half of the state because that's the only place where they're seen. But yeah, about 15 per year.
Okay.
Is what I would estimate.
Are there any plans to create more overpasses or underpasses for wildlife on roads such as 287 or 80?
So I'll answer the first part of the question about if there are any other ones. Yes, there are plans in place to build mostly underpasses. Overpasses, I think, take a little bit more planning. Underpasses, especially for smaller animals, are in the works currently. For some of the bigger highways like 287 and 80, we're still collecting data to see where that might be needed, and how we can make that feasible. You can imagine that for like some of these bigger highways, it's a lot more complicated. There's a lot more partners involved. And so we're still collecting data for some of these bigger highways to see where that might be necessary and if it should be necessary.
And I have another question coming in, and I think this applies to everyone on the call. How many of you have seen bobcats in New Jersey or elsewhere? And if any of you want to reply in the chat, go for it. Another question is, what can humans do to protect wildlife? I think you just touched on that. Okay, I've got another one. Is anyone considering relocating male and females from different groups to a non-populated area?
I don't think that currently there are any plans to do that in New Jersey. I can imagine that means someone might take some healthy bobcats in the north and then relocate them to the south. I don't think there are any plans to do that, but I would also hesitate to do that before we know that they're, if they can survive well.
You didn't mention bears. Do they cross roads?
Yes, bears do cross roads, and I've actually gotten quite a few bears on the cameras before. There are some crazy pictures of bears trying to like squeeze into these tiny culverts, but they do. They also cross above roads. When I've been out in the field in Bobcat Alley, I've seen at least 2 or 3 bears cross in front of me. It's quite a sight when you see a large male bear trying to cross the road. But yeah, they do. And in fact, we've had some radio tracking data of bears, and you can see them travel quite far along the side roads to get across the state too.
How many animal crossings are currently in place in New Jersey?
Ooh, I think there is a map online that shows the number of crossings. I don't have an exact number, but judging from my memory of the map, I would say about 20. And some of them are large, like the Route 78 one. Some of them are really small. And some of them are also represented by just a wider culvert that has places for bobcats and other animals to cross. They're a little bit more subtle.
Okay, and I think you might have talked about this one too, but another question is, how close are you to securing overpasses or natural pathways for bobcats?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. How close are you to securing overpasses for bobcats or natural pathways?
So overpasses, I don't think that there are any in the works right now. Natural pathways, however, I think is a little bit more feasible right now. We're still working with transportation planners to communicate what those natural pathways might look like. So like in the picture that I showed you of the bobcat and her kitten crossing right here, you can see bobcats don't really like water. I mean, house cats don't like water. And we know bobcats also don't like water that much. So oftentimes we won't actually see bobcats crossing in places that have water. This is an exception, and there are exceptions. And so some natural pathways for bobcats could mean making sure that there's a terrestrial passage, places where bobcats can keep dry or other animals can keep dry that may not be as comfortable walking through water. So those things are definitely in the works, but overpasses, I don't think they're in the works right now.
Okay, where is Bobcat Alley?
That is a good question. I'm gonna pop up the map again. So Bobcat Alley is in the northwest corner of New Jersey, and it's in between, well, it's part of Sussex County, and it's also part of Warren County. And you can see in the map inset in the top right-hand corner where that is in relation to the northern half of the state. I hope that clears it up.
Okay, and what do the different colors in the Bobcat map represent? Individual collared cats or groups of cats?
Let's go here. So the individual colors mean that is one collar on one bobcat. And so I think that this map represents about 3 months of movement. And so all of the dots that are hot pink are one bobcat. All the dots that are yellow are another bobcat.
Okay. Do you have specific plans or projects to address the bobcat crossing issue? Will you tie them to specific fundraising programs?
I think right now, New Jersey is still in the data gathering state for some of the projects that'll help bobcats cross roads. So right now, we're doing work on trying to collect that data. And I'm actually not sure about the fundraising campaign, but you will definitely know if we do one of those.
Are there land use laws for planners in these areas to incorporate in planning and development? That's a good question.
Yeah, actually, New Jersey is it has a pretty good situation in that respect. Right now, if there are any, there's one flood hazard law that's really helpful for considering wildlife crossings. If a transportation agency is going to update a culvert or a bridge, if that is located near threatened or endangered wildlife habitat, they have to consider wildlife crossings, and they have to consider taking into account maybe widening it or thinking about what animals might be impacted by the roads in that area. And so that law, which came into effect, I think about 3 years ago, has really pushed a lot of the agencies to start thinking about wildlife crossings in a very specific way. And it's definitely something that is special to New Jersey. I know some other states don't have a law like that. And so they're still trying to figure out how we can engage state agencies.
Are there reasons why animals wouldn't use culverts or bridges?
Yeah, so in a lot of the animals that I see in cameras, a lot of them don't actually use the culverts. And some of that is because they're too small. So like deer often won't use some of the culverts that I'm monitoring just because they can't fit. And sometimes it even depends on what type of deer. So if it's a female deer with a doe, oftentimes they'll use a culvert. But I've seen some times when I've seen a buck cross through and they won't use a culvert because their antlers are too big and they won't fit. Other times, just the way that the land is arranged, it won't be that natural for animals to use the culvert. They'll have to go down to the culvert, or they'll have to take an extra effort to get under the culvert. And so it's much easier just to go on a road. And so there are many ways that we can make culverts and bridges a little bit more attractive to animals. So they use those as opposed to using, the road.
Let me see.
Lots of questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Do bobcats travel in groups?
Bobcats are pretty solitary animals. You would only see them traveling in a group if it was a mother and her kittens, which some of the older kittens can look like adults, so it might be looking like they travel in groups, but unless it's an adult and her young, or it's a mating pair during mating season, you probably won't see bobcats together.
Okay. Is there any way for the general public to write to state representatives to push for more crossings to be developed?
Yes, definitely. I know that that's something that all the biologists and people part of change would really encourage people to do, is to reach out to their state representatives within the state. And I would definitely encourage people to do that. I think that the more people that are talking about wildlife crossings and the more people are keeping it top of mind, the more that we can have the energy and the opportunity to do some of these wildlife crossings.
When is mating season for bobcats?
Ooh, that's a good question that I should know the answer to. I'm not sure. I can't say right now. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just Googled it, February and March.
Okay, February, March. Got it.
Let's
There you
see. Okay. Oh, does TNC receive funding from the Pittman-Robertson Fund, contributed mainly from hunter licenses earmarked for conservation? That's a good question, and that's something I can look into and kind of send any other questions that we don't have the answer to. I can send an email to everyone who attended today. So we'll flag
Yeah,
that
that's a
one
good
for
idea.
follow-up. Which animal do you study, Neha?
So technically right now I'm studying all animals on land, especially those that cross roads, but my specialty is in amphibians and reptiles. I did my master's thesis on the long-tailed salamander, which lives in Bobcat Alley and a little bit outside Bobcat Alley too. So no one's asked me this, but if you were to ask me what my favorite New Jersey land animal is, it is the long-tailed salamander.
Great, thank you so much for today, Neha. Everyone on the call, I did create a short 2-question poll, just getting some feedback on today, and I would love if you guys could fill it out. Any more questions, throw them in chat. We can always do a follow-up email. And thank you for everyone who attended. I'm sorry about the hacker early on, but I think we solved that. Again, thanks so much. I'm gonna launch the poll right now.